On the 30th of January in 2015, the first episode of Life is Strange was released. Life is Strange had a lot of attention at the time, and I figured, why not, let's give this game a shot. And oh boy, did my actions have consequences. During my first playthrough, I fell in love with this game before I even finished the episode. Here we are now in 2025, where the series is now over a decade old, and over these 10 years we've had multiple games, multiple stories, multiple protagonists, all having to make choices that will either affect their lives or the lives of the people around them. So I have an interesting question. What's the best episode in every Life is Strange game? Well, that's what this video is all about. My name is Ben, and for today I'm going to be looking at the best episode in every Life is Strange game. Before we get started, let's go over a few things. This is all my opinion. I am completely confident that a chunk of people will disagree with the episodes I've picked from each game. Point number 2, regardless on what episode I've picked for each game, this isn't going to be a breakdown of the whole episode, nor is this an analysis of the episode either. I'm just going to talk about the episode, point out some highlights, and hopefully make it clear why I believe it's the best episode of each respective game. Once we've gone through the best episode from every game, we will then look at the best bonus episode from Life is Strange. Okay, I think that's everything I need to establish before we do this, so let's get started, shall we? So starting off with the original game, what's the best episode in Life is Strange? Well, immediately I hit a wall of some sort. To be quite honest with you guys, I don't think any episode in the original game is bad. There's probably issues you can find with each episode of the original game, but overall I think all 5 are really enjoyable, and if I was doing a tier list of Life is Strange episodes, every episode from the original game would more likely be on A or S. So needless to say, I think highly of all 5 of these episodes. So after thinking it over and replaying the game a little bit, I came to the conclusion that episode 2 out of Time was the best episode of Life is Strange. One of the biggest focus for this episode is obviously the situation with Kate. In this episode we dive pretty deep into Kate's situation with her video that's going viral at the Vortex party, as well as just in general being treated like shit around campus. I really enjoy the scene in the Two Wells Diner where we have to explain to Chloe exactly what our powers are and how we use them. I think it's pretty fun having Max come up with different ways of proving to Chloe that she can rewind time. Speaking of the Two Wells Diner, we also get introduced to Joyce officially, a member of the Price family who, in my opinion, deserves just as much blame as Chloe and David does for their family dynamic being an absolute train wreck. Joyce is also responsible for one of the hardest decisions a player has to make in these games. Searching for bottles aside, I think the scene in the junkyard with Max and Chloe is also one of the best scenes in the whole game. It's also during the junkyard sequence where we meet this mysterious doe once again. We saw it in episode 1 and now we're seeing it in episode 2. It's transparent, it's ghostly, we can't really properly see it. What the hell's going on with that? And when Max takes a picture to make it even more confusing, the doe's not in the picture. Oh, did I also forget to mention that it doesn't get affected by Max's rewind powers? Imagine if it showed up in future Life is Strange games. Maybe it should have shown up in Double Exposure. This episode also introduced us to Frank. We explore it in later episodes, but our introduction to Frank immediately shows that he has a connection to Rachel, which both confuses and angers Chloe. We later in the episode head back to Blackwell Academy, and Max has the option to help out Warren with his science experiment. You can have some fun interactions with him here, and if you want to get all the pictures and trophies, you're going to have to help him out. More importantly, we also get Kate and Jefferson's conversation. I got curious to see what would happen if I rewinded time as far back as I could at this point, and I ended up putting Kate and Jefferson in a bit of a loop. They were just going over the same conversation and again and again. It wasn't until I entered the classroom where the game actually continued on. Jefferson gets a weird phone call. You can pay attention, listen to some of the things that are being said. You don't really get much, and this is kind of a mysterious phone call. I think it's supposed to imply that this conversation is between Jefferson and Nathan's father, or possibly someone else that he has a connection with that helps him out with his other job. Now let's talk about the fun part of the episode. Kate attempting suicide. Fun. Poor Kate was drugged. She went to one Vortex party, and that will be the last Vortex party she'll ever attend. While I was recording this, I also remembered how depressing it was to enter Kate's room at the start of the episode. Kate is mentally destroyed right now. And you even see that from the state her room's in. It's dark, she covers up the mirror, you can't really see out the window. It always sucks when you have to make the choice of telling her to not go to the police, because realistically, the police would not believe her. She wouldn't have enough evidence to prove that she's telling the truth. Fun fact, this game has been out for over a decade now. Players only discovered this little detail, like a year ago at most? You can actually see Kate walking across the roof when you're in Jefferson's class. Max tries her best to use her powers to prevent her from jumping, but unfortunately, her powers start glitching up. She's able to stop time temporarily to get to the roof, but after that, her powers stop working for a little while. You really need to be careful what you say to Kate. And of course, depending on what choices you made earlier in the episode will also impact Kate's relationship with Max and how much she's willing to listen to her. Finally, we have the principal's office. Principal Wells is in the room with Max, Nathan, David, and Jefferson. And it's pretty much a game of who do you blame? This is probably one of the most interesting parts of the game in my opinion, because there's a lot of different outcomes depending on your previous choices. The most common outcome is Nathan getting expelled. However, depending on your interactions with David, Principal Wells, and Nathan early on in the story, Max could very well get expelled here. Alongside that, David could essentially be fired from his job. If you blame Jefferson, that will result in him not being allowed to go on the trip with the winner of the Everyday's Heroes contest. In the end, I believe this is one of the most intense episodes in the whole Life is Strange series, mostly because of dealing with Kate's situation and trying to help her, still working on mending and, I guess, renewing the friendship and potential relationship between Max and Chloe, the choices of episode 1 affecting certain story elements of your playthrough of episode 2, and the episode's coming to an end with a lot of different outcomes for some of the characters. Like I said, the episode could end with Nathan being expelled, or Max being expelled, or neither of them being expelled, but David is no longer head of security, or Jefferson is not allowed to be as involved with the Everyday Heroes contest. Principal Wells can outright accuse you of being a liar, depending on what choices you made as Max in episode 1 when accusing Nathan or David in that scene. Before I move on to the next game, I want to highlight some strange occurrences I noticed while capturing footage for this video. So I'm at the junkyard collecting bottles for Chloe, and I notice this butterfly by this boat. I don't even really know how to explain what's going on here, so I think I'll just let the footage speak for itself. As if this wasn't weird enough, I made some more story progression, collected the bottles, Chloe shot them, she shot herself, I rewinded time, she shot herself again. Before leaving the junkyard, I went to the boat again, and now there were 2 butterflies. Seemingly popping in and out of existence, glitching through objects. Were these butterflies always here? And do they always glitch out like this? At first I was implied to think that this was just a glitch, or the butterflies were just bugging out because of something's wrong with their coding or something, I don't know. But then we get to Chloe getting her foot stuck in the train tracks, and while I'm running around trying to find a solution to free Chloe, the same butterflies appear. And once again, they're popping in and out, they're clipping through objects. Was my copy of Life is Strange just having a bad day and the butterflies were reflecting that with their glitchy, buggy appearance? There is a small part of me that wants to remove this and put a tinfoil hat on instead and theorize that maybe these butterflies are like this on purpose. Is that possible? One more thing I want to highlight before moving on was during this scene where Kate was about to jump off the roof. I think it's safe to say the developers expected the average player to walk forward immediately to trigger Kate to jump off the roof and then Max to constantly rewind time to try and save her. But if you don't do that, you might notice a few things going on here. The obvious one is Victoria recording Kate on her phone. Bitch. The other thing though I noticed, which I guess does make sense, but again I'm willing to bet it wasn't intended for the player to be able to see this. If you look closely, you'll notice that some of the characters are frozen by the entrance of the building, including David, who's in his running animation running towards the door. He's frozen in place. Obviously this is because that's the position they're supposed to be in when Max freezes time and slowly makes her way to the entrance herself. But again, I think it's safe to say we weren't supposed to see that until Max used her powers. Moving forward, or should I say moving backwards, we now have our second game to look at. So what is the best episode in Before the Storm? I don't know if I'm in the majority or the minority for this, but personally, I think the game gets worse as the story progresses. That's not me saying that the game as a whole is bad. I actually quite enjoy Before the Storm a fair amount. Not as much as the original, but I still think it's an alright game. Unfortunately, the quality goes down as the story progresses. So with that in mind, at least in my opinion, Episode 1, Awake, is Before the Storm's best episode. The beginning of episode 1 is probably one of my favourite segments throughout all of Before the Storm. I think it does a good job of establishing Chloe's character at this point. We get reintroduced to Frank, who doesn't seem to be as much of an arsehole as he is when we first meet him in the original game. There are much more dangerous people around here. All things considered, Frank isn't the worst person to have on your side. You finally get to see Rachel Amber in person and get to see what type of character she is and the type of relationship she has or can have with Chloe throughout episode 1. I don't want to get too sidetracked during this video. There's a lot I could say about Rachel as a character as a whole. In my opinion, she's a liar, she's manipulative, she's the ultimate actress who has one goal in mind, and that is to escape Arcadia Bay. In my opinion, that was her number one mission, to escape Arcadia Bay. When that failed with Chloe later on in Before the Storm's plot, that's why I believe she ended up hanging out with Frank more, because she saw Frank as an alternative method of escaping Arcadia Bay. Like I said, I don't want to get too deep into it because this is a whole different topic, a whole different video. Some of you who really love Chloe and Rachel are probably angry at me for not picking episode 2 as the best episode from this game, but I can't just look at Rachel and Chloe's relationship and base it on that. I'm basing it on everything within this episode. Let's talk about David for a little bit. At least this time around he doesn't smack Chloe in the face. I mentioned this earlier, really Joyce deserves just as much blame as Chloe and David does for their family dynamic being just an absolute mess. I understand Joyce wanting to finally move on from William and try to carry on with her life and meet a new person and form a new relationship with. I'm fine with that, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Chloe didn't make things difficult for Joyce and David's relationship as a couple. But at the same time, David is like the total opposite of what William was. What exactly does Joyce see in this man? We get to explore Blackwell for a little bit, this time as Chloe, get introduced to some characters, some recognisable like Victoria. We get to mess with her a little bit, always fun to mess with Victoria, I'm always up for that. But then we also get introduced to some new characters that weren't in the original game. This is interesting. What happened to these characters? Why aren't these characters in the original game? Why did we need to have a Warren 2.0 in this game? As someone who actually likes Warren from the original game, Elliot is head tilting. I don't know why he exists. I don't know why they bothered to even implement him into the game. He's Warren, but worse. Much worse. Other characters we get introduced to are Samantha, a girl who ends up going through a lot of shit depending on your choices throughout the story. In this episode, she can potentially chew you out for not defending Nathan. To an extent, I get it. They want to present Nathan as a more sympathetic character. They did that in the original game, and they want to really rub it in here to show that Nathan isn't entirely a bad person. But no, he is a bad person. I can be sympathetic towards his relationship with his father being pretty shit, and yeah, his dad is definitely partially responsible for the choices Nathan made. But at the same time, it was still also Nathan's choice. Nathan decided that he's the one with all the wealth and all the money and the power, and he chose to use it to his advantage, to be an arsehole, to be a prick. The point I'm trying to make is that I never choose to defend Nathan during this scene. I always just let things slide. Samantha, you annoyed at me? That's okay. I don't really care about you either. Two more characters we get introduced in this episode are Steph and Mikey. I actually like these two. Steph especially is a really good character, and she goes on to being a main character in True Colors, which is pretty cool. It's a shame she doesn't get much screen time in this game. I kind of wish she did have a bit more with Chloe and Rachel. Maybe she could have been the Warren of this game instead of introducing Elliot, but obviously that would require a lot of changes to the overall plot, so maybe it's best that didn't happen. But also Mikey, I don't have much to say for him, but I think he's an alright dude. I'm going to say something pretty bold here, and I'm not sure how many would agree with me, but if a future Life is Strange game wanted to focus on a returning character, why not let Mikey in? I don't know, I just feel like Mikey deserves a shot of being a more significant character, whether it be the playable protagonist or the best friend slash sidekick slash potential love interest for a future Life is Strange game. I think it could work. I think Mikey has that potential. So, anyone else feel like hopping on a train with someone they just started hanging out with and just going wherever it takes you? Nice Rachel we're having. Yeah, I really do like this scene with Chloe and Rachel on the train. It's a good scene to get to know Rachel a little bit more, but when we get to the park we finally get the truth from Rachel. Why are we here? It's so that Rachel can spy on her dad and cheat on his wife with this mysterious woman. Who is she? Why the hell is he cheating on his wife with this bitch? This is when we get to really see her true colours, if you will. Not just from her reaction to her dad is seemingly cheating on his wife, but also, just generally speaking, I would say, the rage, the anger that Rachel has burning inside her, that she seemingly always blocks away around this persona of being just the popular, positive, happy girl who can just act her way or lie her way through any situation. Regardless on how close you want to be with Rachel, Rachel ends up just leaving, resulting in Chloe also allowing her rage and anger towards thinking about what she just went through with Rachel, thinking about David, thinking about the abandonment she feels with Max. Chloe does more smashing in this one scene than Hulk does in the MCU for the past like 5 to 10 years. Speaking about Max for a moment, we can actually see the text messages that she and Chloe had with one another after Max moved away, and yeah, it gives me mixed feelings. At an older age, at a more mature age, I definitely understand how keeping in touch with friends can be very, very difficult no matter how close you are to them. I would still argue that Max didn't do the best job of keeping in touch with Chloe. If I played this game when I was in my early teens, I would probably completely side with Chloe and be completely pissed at Max for how she treated her. But again, as I've gotten older and as I've just gone through different friendships myself, some that have lost, some that haven't, it's easier said than done. And even if you don't keep in touch with someone for a long time, that doesn't necessarily mean the friendship is dead. I guess the only other thing worth mentioning is the ending of this episode, because it ends on a very questionable moment. Rachel has powers? But yeah, this episode seems to imply is that Rachel had powers. She had some kind of maybe wind manipulation powers, or possibly some emotional power, like something that becomes stronger the more angry she gets. We end this episode off with one of our questions being, wait, does Rachel have powers? Did she always have powers? Does she lose them later on? Oh, also, what's the deal with her family? That's probably also a question people had at the end of this episode. Okay, it's been fun, but now we have to say goodbye to Arcadia Bay. This is the first game for this video where I knew certain episodes weren't even going to be contestants for best episode. I knew it was going to come down to episode 2 or episode 3. If I was making a video like this back when Life is Strange 2 first released, I probably would have selected episode 3. But at the same time, episode 3 is also the episode where I think the game starts to have some problems with its story, as well as being the beginning for me anyway to start disliking Daniel. Look, I know he's just a kid and I'm willing to give him some leeway there, but episode 3, Daniel treats you like a piece of shit regardless on what choices you make. The last portion of the episode could have been completely avoided if Daniel just listened to Sean and stayed outside. Hell, depending on your choices, he could attack Cassidy at the end of the episode. Anyway, enough talking about the second best episode in the game. Let's talk about the best episode in Life is Strange 2, episode 2, Rules. This episode reveals a bit more about Sean's family, with us meeting his grandparents. We have a bit more backstory on Sean and Daniel's mum, and Daniel gets to make a new friend, Captain Spirit, also known as Chris. Chris actually got to be a playable character in the Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, essentially an extra/bonus episode for Life is Strange 2. Out of all the Life is Strange games, I just want to quickly say, I feel like Life is Strange 2 could have benefited the most from having multiple bonus episodes, possibly focusing on characters we meet throughout the game with Sean and Daniel. I don't know, maybe I'm asking for too much, but I think we could have had a Walking Dead 400 Days equivalent revolving around characters from Life is Strange 2. Anyway, Chris and his dad, they have their own family issues. Chris's mum sadly passed away, and his dad is trying his best. You can definitely see that he really does care about Chris, but unfortunately he has a lot of issues. You have the option to try and help Charles and Chris throughout the episode and just basically improve their overall situation. After Daniel uses his powers to save Chris, Chris believes that he's the one that's got the powers, and depending on your choices, it's up to you as Sean to decide whether or not Daniel should tell the truth. I choose to tell the truth all the time for I think obvious reasons. Chris is a good kid, he deserves both the truth and happiness. So, Stephen and Claire, our grandparents. I remember when we first meet them and Sean and Daniel first gets to their house, I thought Stephen was actually going to be the more problematic one of the two when it comes to helping us out and keeping us safe. But then as the episode progresses, Claire becomes more of the nuisance/annoyance. But with that said, it's clear that they both care about their grandkids. It's clear that they both simply wanted to help. And the way this episode ends is always tragic to me, because even though it wasn't perfect, Sean and Daniel had the potential of living a safe, easy life, at least for a little while, staying with Claire and Stephen, and that unfortunately gets taken away from them. What the hell just happened to Daniel? Another strange occurrence while I was recording footage for this video. Daniel went back inside the house. It was as if something pulled him back in. I don't know what caused it. Not only did he get dragged back into the house, he got stuck in the house. He's supposed to be outside with Sean, but instead the house dragged him back inside. Sorry Daniel, you can't go outside yet. We can contact Lila during the episode as well. It's really funny to me how Lila became one of the most popular characters from Life is Strange 2, despite only having one appearance in episode 1. I think it was confirmed that there was no intentions for Lila to return after episode 1. I think originally she was supposed to just exist at the start of the game to represent another element of Sean and Daniel's life that they lose. I'm jumping all over the place here talking about this episode, but rewinding back to the beginning, let's talk about, well, the beginning. Sean is helping Daniel train and improve his powers, with the most important character in the Life is Strange series, Mushroom, our lovable dog where absolutely nothing bad will happen throughout the entire episode. No siree, I am sure Mushroom will be fine. Claire and Steven will get to meet Mushroom. Mushroom will potentially stay with them when Sean and Daniel have to leave. I'm sure in the end Mushroom will live a happy, long life. Oh. Yeah, this scene sucked, didn't it? What a way to start off an episode, huh? Why do I like this franchise again? Every time I play it, I end up getting either sad or depressed. Let's try and have some positive emotions while talking about this episode. Cassidy and Finn are introduced to us for the first time. I really like these characters. I enjoy the scene where we get to interact with Cassidy and get to know her a little bit. And then in turn, we meet Finn. We get to meet another dog. Hopefully this one doesn't get killed. After Sean and Daniel learn a little bit more about their mum and the fact that she actually wishes to see them again after all these years, the police have caught up to him. And just to make things even worse, Steven got attacked by a wardrobe. One thing I do like about this scene, however, is that Claire does her best to help Sean and Daniel. Despite literally just arguing with one another, Claire does what she can to help Sean and Daniel, and I really do appreciate that. Claire and Steven clearly cared about their grandchildren, and it's a shame that they couldn't have done more to help, but they at least do what they can. But unfortunately, yeah, Sean and Daniel have to once again go on the run. They have a nice little moment where they exchange Christmas gifts and just talk about hopefully being able to reunite with their grandparents and Chris one day. But for now, they have to catch a train and carry on their adventure. Hopefully they'll find some friendly faces along the way. Moving on to our next Life is Strange game, True Colors, a game that changed the formula up a little bit for Life is Strange, and I must admit I found it difficult to remember exactly what happened within each episode of the game. As a whole, I think True Colors is a pretty mid Life is Strange game. I don't think it's terrible, nor do I think it's amazing. There's some stuff I like, there's some stuff I don't like, and it all combines together to form this game that I definitely don't go back to often, but whenever I do, I end up still having a decent time. True Colors' best episode, or should I say best chapter, is Chapter 4, Flicker. One of the big reasons why I think this is the best chapter in the game is because it simply allowed Alex to breathe a little bit after everything that's been going on in the previous episodes, as well as also being somewhat the calm before the storm that will be the end of this episode, as well as episode 5. Indeed, the majority of this episode is pretty chilled and laid back. Alex gets to just have some fun, rocking out with Steph and Ryan at her first Springfest. This is also the chapter where you pretty much go all in on either Steph or Ryan as your potential love interest for this game. I personally went with Steph, but I really do like both Steph and Ryan in True Colors. I think they both were good choices to be Alex's love interests throughout the game. We get to explore the town a little bit during the Springfest, and one of the options we have is helping out Ducky using our powers to learn about his past with his partner Tabitha. Ducky's a nice character, and I really like the scene a lot with Alex and him. I have a lot of sympathy for Riley in this episode, where you pretty much get the outcome of her overall story with Eleanor. Going back to Steph and Ryan, they persuade Alex to perform on stage at the Springfest. I really enjoy the scene a lot, I think it's really fun. Like I said, the majority of this chapter is pretty much a breather for Alex, Ryan and Steph. And I appreciate that in this chapter. I think something like this needed to exist in True Colors to just allow Alex to let off some steam, you know what I mean? After a very passionate kiss with either Ryan or Steph though, we unfortunately have to come back to the whole story with Typhon. Pike shows up and arrests Alex. Unfortunately, even though all the information is on this USB drive to prove that Typhon are basically pieces of shit and responsible for Gabe's death as well as many other fucked up things, Pike is basically here to inform us that none of that matters because Typhon are very rich, very powerful, very large, and the USB drive was stolen, so yeah, it's not looking good for Alex right now. Oh yeah, and it's not just Alex, Steph and Ryan are also targets now. This scene is basically a threat. You have the choice to either comply and sign the papers, or you can use your powers to convince Pike to take a look at the USB anyway. He's just a simple guy trying to do his job, and his job is forcing him to pick sides, basically, whether he likes it or not. And as if that wasn't bad enough, Alex has a conversation with Jed, pretty much telling him the whole situation, getting him up to date of what Alex has been doing for the last couple of days. But if anyone can help us, it'll be Jed, yeah? He's been pretty much looking out for us ever since we came here, and especially after Gabe's death. He's been nothing but a nice, kind old man looking out for Alex. He seems to know more than we initially believed. Okay, Jed, what you got to show us? Oh, Jed's got a gun. What are you gonna do with that, Jed? Jed? It's Jefferson all over again. Okay, it's not exactly the same as Jefferson. With Alex's powers, we can read Jefferson's emotions and we can tell that he doesn't want to do this. We learn that he cut a deal with Typhon a long time ago, and that's something you'll end up diving into in the next chapter. Before you played chapter 4, was anyone suspicious of Jed? I'm genuinely curious if anyone out there playing this game actually had some suspicion of Jed before this scene took place. So here we are, the final Life is Strange game I'll be talking about in this video, the most recent and probably the most controversial Life is Strange game in the series so far. Life is Strange Double Exposure. There's a lot I could say about this game in general, but that's a topic for a whole nother day. I'm going to try my best to stay on topic for the video, but with Double Exposure, I must admit, part of me can't help but just talk about the game in general, especially with how messy things got towards the end. Okay, first things first, what is the best chapter/episode in this game? It's definitely not chapter 4, it's definitely not chapter 5, so the first 3 chapters are the only contestants for this video. I'll happily say that chapter 2, Penumbra, is Life is Strange Double Exposure's best chapter. I think this chapter does the best job of having the player be so invested in multiple mysteries that Max has to deal with throughout this story. At the beginning of the chapter, Max is still processing exactly what happened at the end of last chapter and also questioning exactly what's going on with her powers this time. Has she truly gone back in time? After speaking to Amanda, Max realizes that no, she hasn't rewinded time. She's just jumped over to another timeline. She's in an alternate reality. Potentially, that's how her powers always worked. Either way, Max has now realized that her powers are allowing her to jump back and forth between 2 different timelines. One where Safi is alive and the one where Safi is dead. As we progress, more and more issues rise up. We have to deal with these Abraxas weirdos, and this goes into what I was saying earlier. It's kind of difficult to talk about this episode without thinking about what happens next and just how underdeveloped this weird group of Abraxas students are. Seriously, the Abraxas storyline / mystery / group is just a weird element in Life is Strange Double Exposure that doesn't make much sense to me. Anyway, let's talk about Vin for a little bit, shall we? He's an odd character, to say the least. I don't really understand what exactly the writers intended with him. From my point of view, he comes off as the character that's definitely done some shady shit, and morally he's not the best person, but he's not entirely a bad person either. And even in this chapter, we seem to see that he does have a side of him that either regrets the actions that he's made or wishes that things worked out a little bit differently for not only him but others around him. Vin's very flirty with Max, and honestly, even without the player's choices, Max can be pretty flirty with Vin. A part of me wants to enjoy this because I do legitimately like some of the scenes that Max and Vin have in this episode. I think we can all agree that regardless if we like or dislike the character, Vin is probably one of the most strangely written characters in this entire franchise. Focusing on the plot though, Vin seems to be acting even stranger than he already seems to be. Guy's having issues unlocking his own phone? How do you forget your own password, dude? What the hell? And he seemingly forgot the conversation we had with him earlier. Some strange stuff, man. Also, whatever happened to Safi? I thought Safi was supposed to be a significant character throughout this game, and she's only in the beginning of this chapter. Anyway, during Max's investigation to try and figure out what's going on with Safi and who's trying to kill her, we find a restraining order on Safi from Lucas. He claims that Safi has said things to his son. Lucas is the reason why the family is separated right now, alongside other things to just simply try and ruin Lucas's relationship with his son. Anyone else confused? Good, it's not just me. No joke, during my first playthrough of this game I completely forgot about this character when he showed up in chapter 5, but during chapter 2, Reggie claims that he saw himself. Huh? Okay, so what's going on here? Are the 2 timelines merging? Is Reggie seeing the other Reggie from an alternate timeline? We have a couple issues revolving around Gwen. We find out that Gwen was more involved with Safi than we initially realised when it came to her book. Oh, and apparently there's CCTV footage of Gwen dealing drugs on campus. During my playthrough, especially after the Reggie scene, once again I thought this had something to do with the two timelines. In one timeline, Gwen isn't dealing drugs on campus. In another timeline, Gwen is dealing drugs on campus, and unfortunately the Gwen that isn't doing it is the one that's getting caught. At least that's what I thought. I believed something like that was going on. A character was getting into trouble for something that an alternate version of them was doing in the other timeline. That's what I thought was happening with Gwen during my first playthrough. I couldn't be more wrong, could I? We meet up with Moses, who's unfortunately dealing with a pretty serious situation right now. Detective Alderman is snooping around, trying to find a certain camera that went missing on Safi's death. Indeed, we find out that Moses took the camera that Safi had when she was killed. Criminal evidence. So needless to say, if authorities find it in Moses' room, Moses is going to get in a lot of trouble. This is actually probably one of the most fun sequences within the game, using Max's powers to go back and forth between the two timelines to find the camera before Alderman can find it himself. Legit, this is probably one of the best gameplay sequences throughout the whole game. I really enjoyed this a lot. I didn't do this during my first playthrough, so out of curiosity, I wanted to see what would happen if Alderman actually caught Max when he's in the room searching. Turns out Max just rewinds time like she does in the original game. I tried it multiple times to see if anything would change with either the dialogue or the scene itself, but it seems to be just the same scene over and over again. But now let's talk about the ending of this chapter. Legit, I loved it. So Max and Moses are looking through the pictures that Safi took in her camera before she died. They see the selfie that was taken during episode 1, but then Moses realizes that there's another photo, Max pointing the gun. Moses takes it well. Seriously, I think the ending of this chapter is really well done, and without the context of later story elements, this chapter as a whole is pretty strong, I think. So many questions are raised during this chapter. How can we save this other Safi? Who was it that killed Safi in the first place? Why was Vin acting even stranger than usual? What exactly is going on with Gwen, where apparently she's been caught dealing drugs on campus? Reggie saw another Reggie? How is that possible? And of course, the ending. Max killed Safi? So who is this other Max? Is this a Max from an alternate timeline? Is this a Max from the living world when we transfer from the dead world to the living world? Is this a Max from the future? Is this somehow a Max from the past? Legitimately a strong ending to, in my opinion, a strong episode in Double Exposure, when you don't know the context of the rest of the story. This isn't the chapter's fault, and I don't want to focus too much on it in this video, as I mentioned before, but the biggest issues with this chapter is unfortunately the resolution / outcome to these mysteries in the future chapters. I don't think that's fair to allow an episode to lose points because of where things go in later episodes, but in a case like this, I can't help but bring it up because Double Exposure was just a frustrating mess towards the end of its story. Despite having issues that the game as a whole had, the first 3 chapters of Double Exposure was still an okay time. I still enjoyed it. I still wanted to play more. I still wanted to see where the story went. I cared about the characters I was interacting with, well, most of them anyway. And overall, I was happy playing as Max again. I think that's what makes Double Exposure even more frustrating though, because it's not entirely a bad game. There are some good elements in here, there are some good story beats in here. There are some interesting mysteries and choices within this episode especially. If the rest of the game was as strong as Chapter 2, it would still have problems, but at the same time, Double Exposure would probably be a much better game. So that is the best episode of every Life is Strange game, but we're not done just yet. What's the best bonus episode in Life is Strange? We only really have 3 to choose from. The bonus episode in Before the Storm, the awesome adventures of Captain Spirit, or the extra chapter where we get to play as Steph in True Colors. Looking at these 3 episodes, I think we all know what the best bonus episode is already. Yeah, it's the farewell episode from Life is Strange Before the Storm. Are you really surprised? I don't think you should be. Especially at the time of the release of the episode, this was pretty much our farewell / goodbye to Max and Chloe. This was basically like an epilogue to Max and Chloe's story. Chronologically, this episode takes place just after William has left to go pick up Joyce. So after William left, Max and Chloe are having a little pirate adventure around the house. We are on the hunt for treasure, all while Max is contemplating whether or not she should tell Chloe about the fact that she'll be moving away soon. You have the option to tell Chloe at the start of the episode, or you can wait till later. Either way, we find out that Chloe knew all along. She already found out. It was one of those situations where neither characters was sure if they really wanted to talk about it because they knew that things would change. understatement, to be honest, when you know the context of everything from both Before the Storm and the original game. These poor girls are going to go through a lot of shit, aren't they? Speaking of the original game, we have this pretty cool butterfly Easter egg. For a few seconds, a butterfly fades in onto the wood of the fireplace and then fades away. This is an optional thing that you can do in the original game. Like it or not, at some point during this episode, Max and Chloe has to have this conversation about the fact that Max is moving away. A lot of emotional damage for both characters. And speaking of emotional damage, that's how this episode ends. The episode ends on Joyce coming home and telling Chloe what's happened to William. We then get to see the funeral scene, which is equally as depressing. In fact, no, I would say it's even more depressing, because not only do we have to have William's funeral, we also see that on the same day of William's funeral is the day that Max moves away. Damn, why the hell did the writers treat Chloe like this? Unfortunately, with Max having to leave at the funeral, she didn't even really get to say goodbye to Chloe, and our final scene is Chloe sitting in her room listening to a tape message that Max recorded for her. I remember some people theorizing that the recording is from a Max from the future who went back in time one last time after the events of the original game. Overall, this is a good episode, and if I was including the bonus episodes with the respective games that they were in, this episode probably would be labelled as the best episode of Before the Storm. I seriously think this is better than any of the 3 episodes from the main game of Before the Storm. Okay guys, I think we are about done here. That is the best episode of every Life is Strange game, plus the best bonus episode from the franchise. I don't get to talk about Life is Strange often, so a video like this gave me a good excuse to just ramble on about a series I really care about. And yeah, I think that's going to do it for this video, so thanks a lot for watching, hope you enjoyed. Even if you didn't agree with the episodes I selected, I'm terrible at outros, I'm terrible at intros. So I'm just gonna end the video now. See you next time. Hopefully for more Life is Strange content in the future.